Hello and welcome to episode 489 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm good, Andy. It's good to be back in the swing of things because obviously this is now the second show in a row that we've done in 2025. So we've actually done it live, which is great. And there's a lot of people now who are looking at their money. So with a new year, new me, new money, it's really good to see the volume of people that are interacting with our content. It happens every year, actually. January is the biggest time for our site and people engaging, or new people engaging with Money to the Masses. And we did a podcast piece last week at how you get the most out of the show and most out of moneytothemasses.com and everything we do. So go back and listen to that if you are a new listener this week. But it's a period where we get lots of people engaged with money, and hopefully we can help people keep those New Year money resolutions.
Yeah, and so let's get straight onto the show this week because it is a busy show as always, and we've got three pieces. What are they, Damien?
As you say, Andy, it's a packed show. So the big piece is in regard to Vanguard. So before Christmas, Vanguard dropped a bombshell in terms of the changes they're making to their charging structure on their platform. Now, it kind of was snuck in before Christmas, but there are a lot of people who are huge fans and advocates of Vanguard and their low-cost investing. And they changed the platform charges. And what it means, there are a lot of people now for whom Vanguard's platform is no longer going to be as cost-effective. And there are a lot of people who are already moving platforms to other platforms that are far more cost effective for them. So what we're going to do is run through what's changed, how it will impact investors, but also come up with some analysis that we've gone through to explain the alternative options when it comes to platforms and investing in ISAs, pensions, and even general investment accounts. The next piece I'm going to be doing on this show is a bit of a new year piece, actually. So every year you should be checking your credit reports. So those are the credit reports with the three main credit agencies. So I'm going to explain how you can check your credit reports with those agencies for free because some services do charge. And the final piece on the podcast is for people who are thinking about possibly earning a bit of money on the side. So maybe using things like Vinted to sell some bits and pieces like clothes to make some extra money in 2025. There have been some changes that are important when it comes to taxation. So this is just an FYI for anybody out there who's thinking of doing that, because you could end up finding you're going to have to report what you earn to HMRC.
Okay, so let's move on to that first piece of the podcast then, Damien. We're talking Vanguard. They have made some significant changes to their fee structure. And so we're going to be talking about that because they're going to be disgruntled investors. And we'll also be talking about some alternatives. Now, I must just caveat it before we go on. In terms of people listening to the podcast, Damien, you're going to get quite deep into the numbers here and talk about different scenarios. What we're going to be doing for our listeners is sharing the video as well on YouTube and Spotify, and people will see heat maps on screen. And so this piece will make a little more sense if you can watch along with us on Spotify or YouTube, because there'll be heat maps for there so you can keep track of it. So Damien, let's get into it then. Vanguard have been upsetting some people.
So I'm going to explain what Vanguard has announced, how their charging structure is going to be changing, who it's going to impact, and how much more expensive it's going to be, but also then look at the alternatives for investors. And it does depend upon the amount of money you have invested with Vanguard and also what you want to do in terms of the types of things you want to invest in. Now, just to reiterate, Vanguard, from the 31st of January 2025, we've produced an article on the Money to the Masses website, which I'm currently going through on screen, but you will put a link in the notes so people can read it in its entirety. They are introducing a minimum fee of £4 a month on their platform for people who pick and choose their own funds. Now, it's not impacting people who use their managed ISA. If you use their managed ISA service, which is relatively new, they are in fact reducing the charges on that from 0.3% to 0.2%. That keeps it broadly in line with the cheaper robo-advice propositions out there. Now, that's the good news, but the bad news is the £4 a month monthly fee that they're introducing does significantly impact people who have less than £32,000 in their portfolio on the Vanguard investment platform, where they pick and choose the funds and ETFs. The Vanguard Life Strategy funds are the darling of the DIY investor universe. So people who are thinking about, maybe it's the FIRE movement, the financially dependent retire early. You will see lots of content online where people talk about these funds, champion them, and say about investing regularly into them and focusing on that to build wealth for the future. Now, if you have less than £32,000 on the platform invested in any funds, so for example, the life strategy funds, you're going to see the cost go up per year. Now, for somebody who has, say, £5,000 invested in the Vanguard Life Strategy Fund, I'm talking about just the platform fees here, not the underlying fund charges, they will be currently paying £7.50 as I make this video. That's because there is a 0.15% annual platform fee that's capped at £375 a year. But from the 31st of January 2025, with the introduction of that minimum monthly fee, that means they're going to be paying £48 a year as a platform fee. So that's significantly more expensive. So you will be thinking about possible alternatives, and there are much cheaper alternatives out there. So what I'm going to do is run through on screen a number of heat maps that have taken us a very long time to produce by analysing the various options out there, but also the charging structures of different platforms. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, please do hit that like button, because it's taken a lot of time and effort to produce this analysis. And it's important that other people who may be impacted by these changes also see this. And the sort of people that will be impacted are those who have £32,000 or less on the platform. And that will typically be people who have maybe just ISA accounts or have pensions less than that amount. And if you look at the analysis out there, that will be people who tend to be probably around about 40 years and under. So moving across to the first heat map, I must stress the assumptions are that you invest and hold. So you buy and hold your investments, and you may choose to invest regularly into them. We're not talking about people here who are wanting to trade regularly, for example, move in and out of funds or ETFs. I'd argue if you use the Vanguard Investor platform, you are not that kind of person. You're more likely to be a buy and hold investor. So if you want analysis on the cheapest platform for ISA or a SIP, if you are somebody who wants to move in and out of investments regularly, then we'll put links to some different heat maps into the notes of this particular video and show. So the first heat map I'm looking at here shows the cost for somebody who buys and holds a portfolio of funds like the life strategy funds. Now, the first thing to point out quickly is that if you want life strategy funds, then that limits your choices. So automatically you won't be able to use things like Trading 212, things like Free Trade, which have very low costs, or Prosper, who are a relatively new proposition out there. Now, I have to say that Trading 212 do offer an ETF that tracks the index that is essentially the life strategy fund. So that is something you could look at. But if you're looking at the unit trust versions of the life strategy funds, then you can see on screen that the Vanguard Investor platform becomes relatively more expensive when compared to other platforms out there. It's not until your portfolio size increases and you're heading towards that key £32,000 level that you are still enjoying the relatively cheap way of investing into Vanguard funds via the Vanguard Investor platform. Alternatives for people with smaller portfolios include AJ Bell Doddle. What's great about AJ Bell Doddle, although it does have a monthly minimum fee of £1, is they also offer shares. So if you want to invest in some life strategy funds, they offer 3 of them. You can also invest in shares with them. So a limited range of 80 of them. Of course, you can't do that with Vanguard Investor. If you want to do more than that, then you might want to look at AJ Bell's platform. So the full platform is cost effective for the smaller amounts of £5,000 and under. As you move up to the sort of middle range of 25,000 to 250,000, then it's not the cheapest. For people who have £96,000 or more, you should be looking at Interactive Investor and assessing the costs for you, because despite what you might be led to believe online, Interactive Investor was always one of the cheapest ways to invest in life strategy funds if you had £96,000 or more within an ISA. And that's because they have a flat fee when it comes to their platform fees. So it's way more cost effective if you have a large amount of money with them. And in fact, the larger the sum, the more cost effective it is, and you only pay up to £144 a year. If you wanted other platforms to look at, things like Hargreaves Lansdown aren't that cost effective. One thing to also bear in mind is the amount of money you can get on uninvested cash. Now, that's a separate thing altogether. We'll put a link in the notes of the show to an article that details how much interest you can get with each platform. Now, you'll see Invest Engine listed here. Now, they don't provide any interest on cash, but one thing to point out is they don't technically offer life strategy funds, but what they do is have their own version, which is the life plan funds, which they've recently launched. I actually interviewed the chief investment officer about them. They work differently. There are some nuances there. You can look at the full review that we've got on the Main to Masses website. We link to it in the notes where you can find out more about it, but it is an equivalent. Every platform that's listed here and we talk about, we have a full review on the Main to Masses website where you can see more details about the offerings as well as the costs for using that particular platform. Now, I'm going to jump across to pensions quickly. If you are somebody who wants to invest in the life strategy funds within a pension, charging structures are very different. But again, when you get to the higher levels, it's interactive investor that starts to come to the fore. And with a platform like that, you not only have access to Vanguard funds, but you can invest in investment trusts, ETFs, and a whole range of other funds from different providers. So in fact, you can get access to things like retail bonds, gilts, and currencies. When we're looking at pensions again, AJ Bell, Doddle and AJ Bell are ones to look at. In particular, we're assuming people aren't moving around and trading a lot because some of the platforms like AJ Bell do have fees for switching funds. So the message really is if you're an investor with a relatively small amount of money, so we're talking amounts that are below £25,000, then you want to be looking at alternatives like AJ Bell, Doddle, AJ Bell, and Fidelity. They are among some of the cheapest. And when it comes to larger sums within a pension, it was always cheaper to invest with Interactive Investor, even into the life strategy funds with more than £104,000. Now, jumping across to general investment accounts, it's a similar pattern to what we've seen elsewhere. So when we're looking at the ISAs, which ones come to the fore? So take this as an opportunity to look at the different platforms out there, what's on offer, but also look at the offers that you can now get. Previously, platforms didn't give people offers like cashback or reduced fees when you move money across them. It's become the norm now in the market, and that's only been in the last 12 months or so. We provide a roundup of all the best offers out there for ISAs and pensions on articles on the Main to the Masses website. We're going to link to them in the notes of the show so you can go through and look at them at your own leisure. They're constantly updated, and we also try and negotiate exclusive deals for people who consume Main to the Masses podcast, videos, or the website. I'm now going to jump across to ETFs. So if you are somebody who invests in Vanguard ETFs via their platform and you're looking to now move across to somewhere else that's more cost effective, the heat maps are very different because you're going to be starting to look at things like Trading 212, the platforms that don't charge a platform fee for holding ETFs. Another one that you'll want to look at is Invest Engine. So there aren't trading fees for using these particular platforms. Yes, they may have a relatively limited range of Vanguard ETFs, but they will inevitably be alternative ones, because if you're trying to track an index, let's say it's the US market, you'll probably find another ETF by another provider that does the same thing. So looking at the heat map for ISAs, it's going to be things like Trading 212 or Invest Engine that you're going to be attracted to. AJ Bell is still cost effective. Interestingly, Hargreaves Lansdown starts to enter the fray. So we're talking about particularly large sums over £100,000, because when it comes to just investing in ETFs, Hargreaves Lansdown caps their platform fee at £45 a year, because their platform fee is usually a percentage of the assets that you have on the platform, but it's capped if you just invest in ETFs. Moving on to pensions, the charging structures are slightly different sometimes on these particular platforms when it comes to pensions, but generally speaking, the heat map is fairly similar to the previous one I showed you. You're going to be looking at some of the platforms like Invest Engine. You won't see Trading 212 on here though, so that is another thing to bear in mind. When you're looking at a new platform, do they offer the investments that you might want going forward? And do they offer the wrappers? So, for example, Trading 212 doesn't at the moment have a pension. So if you're wanting to move your Vanguard investor pension across elsewhere, then you won't be looking at Trading 212. One thing to point out, I've been talking about Invest Engine. Invest Engine doesn't normally take transfers across to their platform, but they are allowing transfers across when it comes to pensions from Vanguard Investor for the time being. They're taking advantage of the disgruntled investors with Vanguard who want to move across. The thing is, it's the platform that is changing in terms of charging structure. It's not the underlying funds, so people still like the funds and they can access a number of them via platforms like Invest Engine. If we move across to the general investment account, again, you've got a wide range of options here because you have things like Trading 212 come into the fore. They come back into it, free trade, and Hargreaves Lansdown don't actually charge a platform fee at all if you're investing in ETFs in a general investment account. Of course, you're going to be subject to tax if you are holding things within a general investment account. And the same thing goes with Fidelity with the removal of that platform fee. That is unusual for such big names to be among the cheapest platforms out there, the incumbents that we've known for many years. So you can see these heat maps. We'll put links to the article that contains the main ones in the notes of this particular video. Now, if you're somebody who wants to start trading, I'd argue you probably aren't that person if you use Vanguard Investor. But if you do, there are alternative heat maps that we'll put links to in the notes because we have assumed you are buying and you're holding. But if you start to trade regularly, moving in and out of shares or ETFs, then some platforms do charge you every time you do that. And that completely skews and changes these heat maps. So that is a roundup of the platforms out there, the alternatives, and there are plenty of resources for you to click through to and read as well. So if you found that useful, please make sure you like the video and comment because then we can respond to any comments or questions and also any views that you have on which platform you think is better, and it may help somebody else who's also looking for an alternative that's in the same situation as you.
Okay, so let's move on to the next piece of the podcast then. We're going to be talking about checking your credit report, something that we always say you should do at least once a year. Damien, you're going to explain ways that you can do this ultimately for free.
Yeah, so everybody thinks about a credit score, but the main thing you need to check is your credit report. So just to remind people, there isn't a universal credit score. So when you go and borrow money, what happens is the agency or the company that you go to borrow money from will carry out a credit scoring on you. And so each lender will do that in a different way. So if you're going for a mortgage, they will do their own credit scoring. And what they do is check your credit report. And that typically will be with one of the three main credit reporting agencies. And they are Experian, Equifax and TransUnion. Now, each of those agencies do actually provide an individual score that you can check online. The thing is, they're all slightly different. So, for example, Experian will give you a score from between 0 and 999. Equifax, it ranges from 0 to 1,000. And TransUnion, it ranges from 0 to 710. So it makes drawing comparisons between all of these different agencies slightly difficult. But the higher your score, therefore, more likely you are to be lent money by a lender. But as I've already mentioned, it does depend on the lender's own criteria whether they will lend money to you. But the scores of each of these agencies do give you a good indication about your overall credit worthiness. But what you need to do is actually check your full credit report with each of these agencies. Now, why do you need to do it with each agency? Can't you just check one of them? The reason you need to check it with each of them is because they can hold slightly different information, and each lender might check with a particular agency. And so you need to ensure that the information that is on the report for each agency is correct, because there can be mistakes and that can then hinder your ability to borrow money in the future. Now, each of the three credit reporting agencies do have an obligation to provide a free version of your credit report, but that tends to be a slimmed down version of your credit report. If you want your full report, which is what you need to be checking, then you usually would have to pay to access that. But I'm going to explain how you can get those full credit reports of each agency for free. Now, when you look at your report, you'll find all sorts of information on there, past addresses, the various different credit facilities that you have, maybe a mortgage, different credit cards. You need to make sure all of those details are correct, but also that nobody has taken out credit in your name. If there are mistakes, you need to contact the agencies straight away and ask that any mistakes be rectified, because if you don't, then that can impact your ability to borrow money in the future. And that's why you need to make sure you check these things once a year ahead of any potential money borrowing that you are going to be doing, maybe later in the year when you remortgage, for example. Now, let's focus on Experian first of all. You can actually check your Experian credit score for free online, and they also have an Experian Boost service, which you can also use for free, which is quite interesting. It can potentially improve your Experian credit score by taking into account payments for subscriptions like Amazon Prime and Netflix, as well as your council tax. We have a full review of that service, which we can link to in the show notes. Now, if you want to check your full credit report, then Experian does have their credit expert service, which is $14.99 a month, and you can get daily updates to your score, and you can also have a monitoring service that's applied to your credit report with them. There is a 30-day free trial, so you could therefore check your credit report with Experian and cancel within that 30-day period and not be charged. Now, in the notes, I will put a link to a full article explaining how you can check your credit report for free. But in there, we actually list all of the various different agencies and what each score means. So you'll know whether you've got a good rating or poor rating with each agency. I'm not going to run through that on this particular part of the show. Now, moving on to Equifax, you can check your Equifax credit report via their website. There is a service that costs $14.95 a month. It does have web monitoring and identity theft protection all built in. And again, there's a 30-day free trial. So you could, in theory, at least check your report and cancel within that. Now, there is a free way to check your Equifax credit report, and that is by using ClearScore. They allow you to have free unlimited access to your Equifax credit report. And you can also check your Equifax score. And the way that they make money is by recommending financial products, but there's no obligation to buy anything at all. Now, moving on to TransUnion. Now, interestingly, they are slightly different to Equifax and Experian because there isn't a direct paid-for service from TransUnion. Instead, you can use services like Credit Karma, which I personally use and is very good. They have a great app, and you can check your TransUnion credit report for free. They will also send you alerts to anything that changes or when your TransUnion credit score goes up or down. There are other ways you can use something like Totally Money that is pretty similar to Credit Karma when it comes to checking your TransUnion credit score and credit report. Now, interestingly, you are able to access your TransUnion credit score and report via a number of banks as well. So they've signed up to launch these services through the likes of Halifax, Lloyds and NatWest. And you can also access your TransUnion report via Monzo. And if you pay at least £3 a month, so you're taking out one of the paid-for plans with Monzo, you get access to your scores on all three agencies. Now, finally, there is one way to look at your credit reports for all three rating agencies for free in one place. Now, the all-in-one option is actually via Check My File. Now, they provide the three reports in one place. There is a £14.99 a month fee, but that's after a 30-day free trial. So theoretically, you could take out that 30-day free trial, cancel within it, but have already checked your credit report. So that is a roundup of how to check your credit report for free and the best ways to do so with all of the three main rating agencies out there. We'll also put a link to the article on the Money to the Masses website because it also includes some nice tables which shows you options available to you and some comparisons of the cost, but also some tips on how to improve your credit scoring.
Okay, so let's move on to the final piece of the podcast then. And it's that time of year when a lot of people have got loads of extra stuff for Christmas. They're clearing out cupboards and selling things online. Now, there's been a slight change in how these marketplaces like Vinted and eBay have to report the information they have on their site. So, Damien, this is quite important. It's even impacted some of us because our families are doing some of this selling online.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Andy, even my own family started to get into doing a bit of selling of our own personal items on Vinted. And so, actually, I'll give you a quick tip before I move on to the wider piece. Somebody gave me some advice about using Vinted. And if you're going to do it for the first time when you're trying to sell things, they said, make sure you sell the more expensive things first, because it's actually quite motivating when you start to see the money hit your account, because not everything you put online will actually sell, and then you become deflated. So we've started that journey in our household. So that'll probably be added to next year's tally when I talk about how I made money on the side. like I did last week. So that's something to keep an eye on. Now, there are a lot of people out there who do the occasional bit of selling of personal items to things like unwanted clothes or gadgets. Now, that doesn't typically incur any taxation. But if you are trading regularly, so you're buying items to make a profit by selling them, then you are acting as a trader. So you will be required to pay any taxes on your earnings that are due. So in the past, we've talked about the trading allowance for individuals if you sell goods and services online. And now I'll just give you just a quick highlight. But if your annual gross income from online sales exceeds £1,000, then you need to register for self-assessment and declare the income to HMRC. We'll put a link in the notes so people can find out a bit more information. But why we're talking about this in this week's show is because there are new reporting requirements that have come into place for platforms like eBay and Vinted that will be sharing sellers' data with HMRC. So this applies to individuals who in 2024 sold 30 or more items or earned approximately £1,700, which equates to €2,000, through these platforms. So if that is you, then they will contact you to say that they are going to be sharing the information with HMRC. Now, the aim of the sharing of the data is to ensure compliance, but it doesn't mean that there are any new tax rules out there, but it does mean that HMRC will know about people's activities. So it's important that if you are going to be using these trading platforms, that you keep detailed records of all sales and expenses going forward, because you might just hit that 30 sales number, and therefore the platforms will report that to HMRC in the future. Now, one thing to bear in mind, that if you do get to a point where you have gross income from online sales that exceed that £1,000 level, then you need to register for self-assessment and declare this income to HMRC. So looking back, if you made more than £1,000 selling items in the 2023 to 2024 tax year, then you do need to make sure that you register for self-assessment and you submit your tax return before the 31st of January 2025.
Yeah, and if you're at all unsure, of course, you can seek the services of a tax specialist or an accountant, because they will certainly be able to help you out and advise on whether you've sort of hit those thresholds or whether there's any tax at all to pay. So, Damien, that is it. We are done for this week. Please do rate and review the show in all the usual places. It really helps us, especially at this time of year when we're trying to help more and more people. So go onto our Spotify channel if you can and subscribe and follow the show, and also on the YouTube channel as well. Do have a look at Facebook. There's lots and lots going on in our community group at the moment. So that's facebook.com/groups/Money to the Masses. And of course, check out our Instagram and our TikTok social channels as well. So Damien, that is it. We are done for this week. Until next time.
Until next time.